that you might find next to spicier curries at a Thai meal. Palate cleansers are what you need, so you make sure you're tasting what's really there, especially if the flavors are very strong. That was a great sermon that I wrote, by the way. I just want you to know that. I wanted to give you something uplifting to chew on after the last few weeks when we've had to deal with such heavy things up here in the pulpit. And I was going to tell you how spiritual practice often acts like a palate cleanser in our lives, sort of to help us attend to the subtle changes the Spirit is bringing about, which in a kind of roundabout way is what God is asking Peter to do in this weird kind of inexplicable vision about the animals on the sheet that probably didn't make any sense as you were hearing it. God is inviting Peter to adjust to some new non-kosher foods that would become part of his life as the church became more diverse in its nascent stages. I wanted to give you that sermon, but then yesterday at 2:30 in the afternoon, an 18-year-old white man, his mind warped by misinformation and fear, and his hands armed with a gun, walked into a Tops grocery store in Buffalo, New York, and killed 10 people, most of them black. And yet another tragic expression of the deeply racist threads that run through our country's social fabric, and the very real campaign active in our country's far-right political wing, which seeks to amplify those forms of paranoia and encourage violence against our siblings of color. And I have to say, people ask me why I usually write my sermons at the last minute, like on Saturday or even Sunday morning rather than like last Tuesday afternoon. And I usually say something like, I like to keep things fresh, which is true. But it's also true that this kind of tragedy has happened so regularly in the course of my career that it now seems foolish to do otherwise. I've now lost count of the number of Saturday nights I have spent reading news coverage of mass shootings and other public acts of violence and trying to figure out how to reformat whatever sermon material I had already shaped in order to help the congregation I'm serving at that moment make sense of those events. At this point, I often wonder whether I even need to comment on such matters because they are so commonplace among us. Mass shootings and racially motivated acts of violence seem to have become part of our everyday reality. I could probably give 3 sermons a month about contemporary expressions of gun violence, school shootings, racism, and its various expressions. It's that frequent. And I know people get tired of hearing about it. We all want something more winsome and uplifting in our lives, don't we? And certainly it would be easier for me to let such dark things pass without comment. But then I remember the vows that I took at my ordination, one of which was to stay true to the confessions of our church. Statement which articulates the call of the church over time to bear witness in all times and places to Christ's reconciling love, offering a common message in a time of common need. And I remember that what I said when I stood up there at my ordination was that I understood it was my job as a minister and our job as Christians to pay attention to what is happening around us, even if it is uncomfortable or despairing. To hear the cries of those suffering in our midst and to tend to their wounds, to see the plight of those who hunger and thirst for justice, and to stand with them in the fray as we struggle to bring it about. And yes, that is tiring work, and it can be discouraging work, for the cries of the suffering seem unending, especially in these days. Sometimes it feels like one tragic news cycle runs right into the next, doesn't it? But I also remember my friends and neighbors and clergy colleagues who are people of color and who particularly are Black Americans, and I recognize they don't get to take a break from paying attention to the violence that stalks them and their children in every public and domestic sphere of their life in this country. And so here I am, talking to you about these things again because that is what they told me to do when I took this job. And I often think about, that's what I'm thinking about on Saturday night. I don't know what you guys are doing on Saturday night. I'm thinking about how do we do that work well? How do we pay attention without getting overwhelmed? Do you ever wonder that? How do we tend to these serious matters without ending up despairing and unengaged? That's kind of the question of the day for us, I think. And here is where God is so very good. Because even though I am not telling you all those things I thought I was going to be telling you about the science of the human taste receptors, God would never let me waste a good theological idea, which is the one I had about spiritual practice as a palate cleanser. And though that was going to have a sort of more positive bent in the original iteration, I do think it has something to do actually with what we need in this situation too. Right? We need a way to be able to focus on what is really happening in this moment without getting overwhelmed. We need a way to see and experience this specific thing that's happening because it's an important part of our job as citizens in the world. Right? We need a way to see and experience Buffalo, New York, to mourn these specific people who lost their lives, to lament this specific young man who perpetuated this violence, and to do so in a way that connects it to other related events, but not to have it be totally subsumed by them. Does that make any sense? Do you wonder ever about how we do this? You know, that we need to pay attention to this and to see the threads of connection to other things that are happening in our world, but not throw up our hands and say, oh, more gun violence, I guess that's just what's happening today, and give up. We need to draw from our attention to this specific thing, not weariness, but resolve. It's always the question, how do we pay attention to injustice in a way that engenders not weariness, but resolve? And the way I think we do that is through spiritual practice. I really do. You know, I've heard a lot of criticism these last few years about the sentiments, thoughts, and prayers. Have you read any of these disgruntled pieces on the internet, right? Thoughts and prayers. It's what politicians say whenever something tragic but somewhat preventable happens and they have no intention of doing anything about it, but they say, I send my thoughts and prayers. You know, there's a lot of reasonable critique of that perspective, right? What's needed is more than thoughts and prayers. I'm sure that we'll hear about some thoughts and prayers in the upcoming days. And I agree with part of that critique. Prayer without action is often empty, devoid of the Spirit's power. But I don't think we need to throw the baby with the bathwater out here, right, and say that we don't need prayer at all. Sure, prayer should not be the antithesis of meaningful action. In fact, I think it should be something more. It should be its beginning. You know, I really do believe that spiritual disciplines, and when I say that, what's a spiritual discipline? I mean prayer, silence, song, attending to scriptural wisdom. Yes, I mean reading the Bible every now and then. That these are essential components to a life of engagement and action that is sustainable. They are what allows us to tend to each experience in its specificity, but also in a way that connects it to our larger work for justice. I think spiritual practice is what allows us to do that, what sustains us in our quest to be attentive without being overwhelmed. And by the way, I think this is true of both communal and individual experiences. If you get into a time when you feel like your life, your own life, is just a series of unfolding frustrations, losses, or pain, then I would suggest that you need spiritual disciplines too to keep moving forward. They are channels for these big, strong experiences. And my growing sense over the last months and years is, in fact, that we really need to have these channels open. Because the alternative is just to get overwhelmed and be tempted to just numb it all out. Have you ever had that experience? Let me say, I do advocate for responsible media consumption to protect one's mental health, like reading the New York Times for 10 minutes and then going to take a walk. That's healthy. Not paying attention at all, actively avoiding the feelings associated with such events through numbing behaviors like eating, using substances, or over-consuming, that's not that healthy. Social work superstar Brene Brown talks a lot about this and how much our culture encourages us to just sort of numb our emotions in order to deal with these difficult times we live in. In her famous TED Talk on the subject, she jokes that these difficult things happen in our communities and our own lives, and we're tempted to just go out and eat 2 banana nut muffins and drink 3 beers and spend $300 on Amazon, right? Pick your poison. But she reminds us that pushing away the bad stuff, the bad feelings, does what? It also pushes away the good stuff. We make it so that we can't feel the difficult feelings, we also can't feel the joy and delight and awe that are part of human life and lived in community. And so maybe that's actually the best news of all, right? That all the same spiritual practices that we use to sustain us in times of difficulty are also what magnify our feelings of joy and fulfillment in life. It's both. And in all of them, we find an affirmation of God's presence with us in all things. So we come here, we go to our room and we sit down to pray and to weep or to give thanks. We come to sing our songs and to listen to each other and to share our joys and concerns. And then we get up to work and to march and to organize and to celebrate. Having drunk from the deep well of God's grace, we do all those things knowing that the work matters, that the gospel of peace matters, and that the Easter message of life over death, of love over hate, is still at work even in this broken world. Now here's some more good news. You ready for a little more good news? I told you this is going to be a pick-me-up, right? Do you know who else needs to figure out how to use spiritual disciplines to sustain a life of engaged activism? Everybody else, all our neighbors, everyone around us. We are living in an unprecedented time of turmoil and grief. And also, because of modern technology, we are living in a time of nearly infinite and immediate awareness of the unprecedented time of turmoil and grief. Right? We are all learning at this moment how to survive in this world, and we all need disciplines to help us to do that if we're going to make it much further. And do you know who has some specific wisdom to offer about the spiritual disciplines that sustain hope and activism? Do you have any ideas about where people might go to find out about that? It's the church. You know, I think this is like, we've been talking about what's our role in this culture right now. What's our role in this historical moment? What's our role in the community? Maybe this is it. Maybe we are a center of spiritual disciplines and practice that supports people navigating this world and working actively for its redemption. I think it's possible, right? We can try it. You ever thought about that? I mean, I kind of like that. I like that because it points us outward. It says, this is not the meal. This is not the meat of life experience. This is what helps you to experience the real meal once you leave here. This is what teaches you to attend to the tastes of love and grace and reconciliation and forgiveness and justice once we go out. I think fundamentally that's what the story from Acts that we read back before you even started listening to the sermon, which you can't even remember now, was about God calling to Peter and saying, I'm asking you to consider doing something new. And in this way to expand the message, the reach of this message of peace I've given in the world, in the life of Jesus Christ. What do you think about that? You think we could try that? Say, hey, come on, we've been working for about 2,000 years to figure out how to be engaged citizens in a world that is full of darkness but also light, and full of tragedy but also joy. We've been trying to think about how to build communities of justice and love and inclusion and all that. Why don't you come on with us and try it out a little bit? You know, I want to end with a poem, which is one of my favorites. It's about how do we integrate the practice of things like praying for peace into our lives? How do we tie that in? It's a poem called Pray for Peace by Ellen Bass, and I'm just going to offer it to you for your imagination and hope for some continued conversation with you about how this place might become a center of spiritual discipline and how we each might integrate those things into our own lives. So here is Pray for Peace by Ellen Bass. Pray to whomever you kneel down to. Jesus nailed to his wooden or plastic cross, his suffering face bent to kiss you. Buddha, still under the bow tree in the scorching heat. Adonai, Allah, raise your arms to Mary that she may lay her palm on our brows. To Shekinah, queen of heaven and earth, and Inanna in the stripped desert. Then pray to the bus driver who takes you to work. On the bus, pray for everyone riding that bus. For everyone riding buses all over the world, drop some silver and pray. Waiting in line for the movies, for the ATM, for your latte and croissant, offer your plea. Make your eating and drinking a supplication. Make your slicing of carrots a holy act. Each translucent layer of onion a deeper prayer. To hawk or wolf or the great whale, pray. Bow down to terriers and shepherds and Siamese cats, fields of artichokes and elegant strawberries. Make the brushing of your hair a prayer, every strand its own voice singing in the choir of your head. As you wash your face, the water slipping through your fingers a prayer, water, softest thing on earth, gentleness that wears away rock. If you are hungry, pray. if you are tired. Pray to Gandhi and Dorothy Day, Shakespeare, Sappho, Sojourner Truth. When you walk to your car, to the mailbox, to the video store, let each step be a prayer that we all keep our legs and we do not blow off anyone else's legs. If you are riding a bicycle or a skateboard, in a wheelchair, each revolution of the wheels a prayer as the earth revolves, less harm, less harm, less harm. And as you work, typing with a new manicure, a tiny palm tree painted on one pearlescent nail, or you are delivering soda or drawing good blood into rubber cap vials, twirling pizzas, with each breath in, take in the faith of those who have believed when belief seemed foolish, who persevered. With each breath out, cherish. Pull weeds for peace. Turn over in your sleep for peace. Feed the birds each shiny seed that spills onto the earth, another second of peace. Wash your dishes, call your mother, drink wine, shovel leaves or snow or trash from your sidewalk, make a path. Scoop your holy water from the gutter, gnaw your crust. Mumble along like a crazy person stumbling that prayer through the streets. Amen. We will respond in song from your seats. There is a longing in our hearts.